Hi, I'm Dinesh Joseph, and I play percussion and timpani with the Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra. And today I'm going to talk about my beginner's toolkit of ideas and tips for new percussionists. We're going to start on snare drum. So, the first thing you're going to do when you get your instrument for the first time and bring it home, whether that's a snare drum or a drum pad, is you're going to put it on a stand and set it up so it's ready to play. And the first thing you have to determine is how tall should your snare drum be, and this is obviously going to be relative to your height. And so, roughly where you want the drum, the surface of the drum, the top head of the drum to be, is roughly a little below or at the height of your belt. Okay, it's a range of maybe 2 or 3 inches, and it's a little different for everybody based on how your body is proportioned. So even if there's another person that's the exact same height as me, I'm about 5'10", somebody else might have a shorter torso and longer legs, or shorter legs and a longer torso, and slightly different arm positions. And so where we want the drum might vary a little bit based on those variables. But roughly, get it to a little below your belt height, and that should be you should be close at that point. And then as you start to practice and play, you can make further adjustments. The next thing we'll talk about is how do you position your drum on the stand relative to where you're going to play. And this is really important. So every snare drum, if you don't already know this, the reason it's called the snare drum is that there are snares, which are cables and wires that run across the bottom of the drum that give it that very recognizable sound of a snare drum. And on either end of the snares, you will always have one bracket on one end of the drum that holds the snares on that side. And on this other side is another bracket with something called a strainer or a throw-off that controls the snares. It pulls the snares on and off the bottom of the head. So when you set your drum up, you always want to be right in line with those snares, so that when you're playing directly over those snares, roughly parallel to those snares, right? You don't want to be set up 90 degrees to that, where you're playing over here. Now you've got the snares running this way, you're playing perpendicular to the snares. The reason for this is 2 things. First of all, you get better snare response. The drum sounds better when you play right over the snares. The other reason is that it's convenient when you're in rehearsals and performance. You will need to turn the snares on and off when you're playing or not playing, because if you leave the snares on and other instruments play, you'll hear that the snares, I'm not sure if you can hear that on this recording, but the snares will vibrate. So when you're not playing the drum, you want to turn the snares off. If the strainer is always right in front of you, it's very easy and efficient to do that. So now that your drum is set up and it's positioned correctly, one more variable to consider is the angle of your drum, because all snare drum stands and drum pad stands have a mechanism to tilt it. And I think that there are 2 correct or possible ways to do this. One way is to have the drum perfectly flat so that the drum heads are parallel to the floor, okay? Perfectly acceptable way to play. If I were to play the drum flat, I would actually raise it up a little bit higher, an inch or so higher for my comfort in playing the drum. The other way is, and this is how I play my drum, is I actually tilt the drum slightly away from my body. So it's angled, this way. And it's just very slight, just a few degrees. And I find that by angling the drum, because when you play the drum, your sticks are at an angle like this as well. By angling the drum forward, it helps the tip of the stick meet the head a little bit more face on. And I feel that gives me slightly better response and rebound from the stick. So those are your 2 options for the angle of your drum. So now we need to talk about where on the drum do you play? Because you've got this great big 14-inch diameter drum head. but you don't want to be playing all over that drum. There's specific spots that you want to aim for. The first thing to understand about a snare drum is that we are not aiming for the dead center. You do not want to play right in the bullseye center of this drum. It doesn't sound good and it doesn't feel good. All right? So the way to figure out your general playing spot is you find that dead center spot. You find your bullseye, and then you find the very edge of the drum head. Okay? And you look at those 2 points. And the point that's in between those two, that's over the snares, that's your playing spot. And you'll notice that that playing spot is not on the side of the drum that I'm on. It's across the drum. So I'm going across the center of the drum and playing on the far side of the drum. And if you can see on my drum head, I actually have a circle drawn that shows me my target spot, okay, which is that general playing spot. I will pretty much never play any closer to the center than this. I will play closer to the edge when I play softly. All right, so my playing area on the drum in general is from about, half an inch from the very edge of the drum to this point. All right, and that's where you want to play. So where do you stand and position yourself to play on this spot that we've identified? If you stand too far back from the drum, like I'm standing now, and you put your sticks here, you'll see that I'm really reaching, especially if I want to play on the edge of the drum and play softly. I'm really kind of reaching forward to get to those spots, and it's not comfortable, and it's not efficient, and it makes it hard to, you lose power to your playing and you lose control. So you want to position yourself really close to the drum, almost touching the drum, really, really close, so that when your hands are in your playing position, your arms are at your side, your shoulders are back, everything is really sort of organic and natural, and it feels really comfortable to play in your beating spot, halfway between center and edge, all the way out to the edge. You're not reaching, you're not scrunched up over top. It's just right. So you want to kind of step right up to the drum, get as close as you reasonably can, and then put your hands on the drum. So you're set up, you know where to play, your drum's at the right height, it's angled the way you want it. Let's talk real briefly about how you tune your drum. Your drum should come with a drum key. It looks like this. It's usually kind of a T-shaped, and it's a little wrench. It's got a square hole, and it fits on these little square-headed screws that are called tension rods. Most snare drums have either 8 or 10 tension rods that go around the circumference of the drum. This drum has 10. I'm going to tell you right off the bat that when it comes to playing concert snare drum, not snare drum on a drum set, but when you're playing concert snare drum with your concert band, your school orchestra, or in your practice room, playing rudimental snare solos and concert snare solos, all that kind of stuff where you're standing up and playing a drum, they are almost always tuned too low. You almost always need to bring those drums up, because for that kind of playing, for that style of snare drumming, you want your drum to be tight and crisp and articulate. Okay? So when you tune your drum, you want to do it in an even, organized fashion. So what I do is I start on the first lug on the right hand side of the playing side. So it's on the right hand side of the strainer or the throw off that we talked about earlier. And I'm not going to do it now, but you turn it like, you can turn it a quarter turn or a half turn, and however much I turn it, if I turn it from here to here on this one, I then go across the drum and I do the same thing on that lug. And then I move over one and I tune this one, and I come back across and I do this one. And then I go over and I tune, boom, boom. You go all the way around so that you're always tensioning the drum sort of evenly across it. You're not just going around the circle, clockwise. All right. And you can hear my drum. This is a pretty small drum. It's a 4-inch depth. But it's cranked up there. It's pretty tight. You probably won't be able to get your drum quite as tight, but you want to get it up so that it's pretty crisp and clean sounding and rebounds really well. In terms of how you adjust the snares, you're going to turn your snares on with your throw off so that they're pushed up against the bottom head. And then every drum will have some kind of a knob. Usually this knob will be on the same side as the strainer. This drum is a little different. But you're going to want to take that knob, and the best way to tune your snares is to just experiment. So turn the snares on and then loosen your snares so that they're not really in contact with the drum. So I'll do it on this one. If I loosen this up, if I loosen it up enough, the snares, even though my strainer is turned on, the snares are not in contact. And then as you play the drum, you turn that knob until you start to hear those snares engage. And at some point, if you over tighten them, the drum will start to sound kind of, you won't get a good response and it sounds kind of choked. If they're under tightened, it's going to feel really wet and like the snares are buzzing too much. So you just need to find that sweet spot where it's clean and crisp, but not too tight and choked sounding. Okay. The last thing you'll notice is that I have a small cloth that I put on the drum, and I've adhered it to the playing side of the drum. Doesn't need to be this big. It could be a lot smaller, but any kind of small cloth, a handkerchief, or a little piece of scrap cloth, or a little piece of leather will do. And what you'll hear is that without the cloth, if you can hear on this recording, there's sort of a high ringing overtone that sort of gives the drum a shrill sound. When you add this little cloth, it just kind of focuses that sound and dries it up. There's some other drums in this room that when I strike this drum, you might hear some ringing still. But in general, having a small cloth on the drum really helps to focus and clean up that sound. Let's talk a little bit about real basic technique and how I approach playing snare drum. So the first thing I'll talk about is my grip and how I hold the stick. And the way that I hold the stick is that my main grip, the stick is really held between the pad of my thumb and my index finger. And to be more specific, it's held in the first joint of my index finger and the pad of my thumb. And you'll see that at this angle, the top of my thumb, and I can show this camera as well, the top of my thumb is not above this edge of my index finger, okay? And it's really the pad of my thumb. I'm not pinching with the tip of my thumb. I'm keeping it flat on the pad of my thumb. And then these back three fingers fully and loosely wrap around the stick. So they're not really in charge of holding the stick. All of the stick is held here. But then these back fingers will engage with the pads against the stick to create rebounds and multiple bounce strokes and double strokes for playing rolls and ornaments. All right, so that's what my hands look like underneath. All right, and you'll notice that my grip is closed. So the space between my thumb and my index finger and the palm of my hand is not, you shouldn't be able to fit a drumstick in there, okay? It should be a closed grip so that the stick is fully held in the hand. It shouldn't be held in the fingers, in the tips of the fingers. You want to hold that stick fully in your hand so that all of the fleshy parts of your fingers and palm are in contact with the stick. But you'll see when I move my wrists, the stick has some play. I'm not gripping so tightly that the stick can't move in the hand, okay? So now we've stepped up to the drum. I'm going to take the snares off for most of these demonstrations just because of volume. And so you get your grip right where you want it, thumb and index finger, other fingers wrapped around, nice closed, full grip. And I let my hands just sort of swing and fall totally naturally at my side. And then I just put them up on the drum in my beating spot. And you'll notice that the backs of my hands are facing the ceiling. So I'm not playing like this with my thumbs up, okay? My hands are turned over, and they're basically in front of my hip bones. So I'm not out at a strange angle like this, and I'm not pulled in real tight like this, right? It's very natural so that my shoulders, everything is really open and sort of just the way I would if I was just standing here. I'm standing like this. Now my hands are on the drum, and nothing much has changed except that my hands are up and on the drum now, okay? And so if you kind of note the angle of my sticks and the position of my hands, that's how you want to look when you start to play. We've established our stance and our grip. Now let's talk about our stroke and how we hit the drum. So the first thing you want to think about is that you're just going to use your wrist. your wrist is going to go up and then down. And you don't want to think about moving from the elbow and the shoulder. There's a time and a place where that happens. There's nothing wrong. Like, your body is going to move when you play drums. And so you shouldn't be in a mindset where if you feel that your elbows and your shoulders and other parts of your body are sort of engaged while with your playing, that's okay. But what you want to focus on at the beginning is that it's when you're playing single strokes on the drum, that it's my wrist that is the main activator of that stroke. And the really important thing when you're doing this is that your hands are soft and loose, that you're not gripping the stick so tightly that it can't have play in your hand, because if you do that, then you can't allow the stick to bounce naturally off the drum. We call this rebound. And rebound is maybe the most essential aspect of playing drums, is being able to fully harness and engage with the natural rebound of the stick off the drum. And the thing that it's most like is bouncing a ball. If you bounce a basketball, your arm and your wrist sort of push the ball to the ground, and then the ball hits the ground, and then it bounces back up, and then your hand raise. If you can dribble a basketball, your hand will kind of raise up with the basketball and then push it back down. And so to dribble a basketball, it's your hand isn't just striking sort of, it's not just waiting for the ball to hit it and then hitting it back like a pinball machine. In order to dribble a basketball and control it, your hand has to move in concert with the basketball so that it pushes it down, and then your hand comes in contact with the ball, but it goes up with the ball. And then when it reaches a certain point, your hand pushes it back down. So then as it's pushing it back down, the ball stays in contact for a split second. And then it accelerates away from your hand and it hits the ground. And then your hand comes back up with the ball, comes in contact with the ball pushes your hand up, and then your hand pushes the ball down. That ball pushes your hand up, your hand pushes the ball down. It is really the same thing with your drumsticks. You're throwing the stick down, you're not pushing per se, but you're kind of throwing the stick at the head. And then your hand is following the stick on that rebound. It's not preventing it, it's not controlling it. Your hand shouldn't be the thing that's lifting the stick. It's just following it. And then when you get to a certain point, you can let it rebound all the way up, like that. You can let it rebound just a short distance, but always that stick is bouncing up and your hand is interacting with that bounce. It's not fighting against it. So even when you're doing just the simplest playing of just playing hand-to-hand eighth notes, you want every one of those strokes to be really rebounding and bouncing really naturally and cleanly off the head. So one of the things that is unique to playing percussion, maybe piano, that is talked a lot about when you start to study the instrument and train, is this concept of playing evenly. And what we generally mean when we speak about playing evenly is that your right hand sounds exactly the same as your left hand. So that if you're playing a rhythm, when the listener hears you playing that rhythm, they don't hear two different sounds. They're just hearing one sound, one unified sound. And they can't tell which hand is your right hand and which hand is your left hand. And the reason that this is sort of unique to percussion and piano is that really no other instrument has this mechanic where we're playing one piece of music, but you've got these two implements and two separate hands that have to work together to realize that music. And as human beings, 99% of us have a dominant hand and a non-dominant hand. And so your left hand, and for most of us, I'm right-handed. So for me, my non-dominant hand, my left hand, has to work a little harder. And you're going to find that getting your left hand to do things as well as your right hand, or your non-dominant hand to do things as well as your dominant hand, is a challenge. It's one of the most challenging technical aspects of playing percussion. So what does evenness really mean beyond just make your hands sound the same? And the way I like to describe evenness is that evenness is a three-legged stool. Okay? So you have to have three different kinds of evenness all working for your playing to sound even. I'll demonstrate the first kind of evenness. First, I'm going to play even strokes. Then I'm going to modify my playing so that it is uneven. And I want you to listen and see if you can tell what changed so that my playing stopped sounding even. And then I'll go back to playing even. So it's going to be even, uneven, and even. So what happened there is that halfway through, my one hand, my right hand, started playing louder than my left hand. So instead of, it was, that is uneven. Sometimes that might be what the music calls for, but in this, for the purposes of what we're talking about right now, we don't want any note to sound louder than the next. That is called dynamic evenness. So each hand has to be playing at the same volume, the same dynamic, in order to sound even. That's the first leg of the stool. Here's the second leg. Let's see if you can hear this. So again, I'll do even, uneven, even. So what happened that time? It wasn't dynamic. My hands continued to play the same volume. But I went from having an even sound to an uneven sound. And what you probably hear is sort of like a beep-bop, 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 high-low, 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 high-low. What happened is that my right hand moved to a different spot on the head. So instead of both playing on the same spot in my target, my right hand moved outside of the target, closer to the rim. This is called timbral evenness. T-I-M-B-R-A-L. Timbre, which is sound quality. Timbre is the way that you can hear several different instruments play the same pitch. And you know that they're three different instruments. They sound different because each instrument has a slightly different timbre. So you can hear a trumpet play middle C, and you can hear a flute play middle C, and you can hear a cello play middle C, and your ear can identify those sounds. Even though they're all playing the same pitch, your ear can identify those sounds. That's timbre. So a snare drum has different timbres depending on where on the drum you play. So if your sticks are not really playing in exactly the same spot on the head, you are very likely going to hear a timbral difference between the sticks. So that is the second leg of our evenness stool. Here's the third leg. Even, uneven, even. So what happened that time is I went from playing evenly spaced notes, where they're all the same amount of time between each note, to unevenly spaced notes. And this is called rhythmic unevenness or rhythmic evenness. And that is the third leg of our stool. If your rhythm, if the consistency of the timing of your strokes is not the same between each stroke, that will sound uneven. So the three tenets of evenness are dynamic, timbral, and rhythmic. And if you can work on addressing each and identifying when you hear something that doesn't sound even, Try and listen and go, why doesn't it sound even? What am I doing that doesn't sound even? Is it my dynamic? Is it my rhythm? Is it my timbre or my beating spot? Is it two of those three things? Is it all three? The sooner you can diagnose that and then address it in your playing, the sooner you can play evenly. And when you can start to play evenly, then you can start to phrase. And then you can start to really make music and really play the music that you hear in your head. I hope this has been helpful, and I wish you all to have a great time and good luck in pursuing playing percussion.